Hello everyone, this is Nitpicking Nerd, and this is my review of episode 1 of season 2 of Star Trek Picard. And I think it's definitely an improvement from season 1. It seems to me like they listened to a lot of the criticism we had towards season 1 and they seem to be trying harder to please all the Trekkies. So the whole attitude is suddenly much more optimistic and much more in the spirit of Star Trek. Suddenly we see actual Starfleet ships which look much better than the copy-paste cheap version of Starfleet ships we saw in the previous season, and we see the interior of Starfleet ships, and the whole feeling of it is much more optimistic, much brighter, and not so pessimistic and depressing and horrible as we saw in season 1. So it does feel like they tried harder to make it more Star Trek-ish and corrected a lot of the issues, and even the way that Picard was treated as a character, across season 1, everybody were hating on him, humiliating him, disrespecting him throughout the whole season. And in this episode we actually see people giving him respect. He's now an admiral again. He seems to be the head of Starfleet Academy, even though we didn't really see that much of him. We only see him give a speech to the new cadets, and later when he's on the new Stargazer, people in the corridors actually give him respect. They whisper his name, they all recognize him, they stand at attention, they all give him respect because he's the famous Captain Picard. So this is the opposite of what we saw in season 1 when people didn't even recognize him. People in Starfleet didn't even know who he was, and so that was so insulting and humiliating. And that's how it was the whole season. So it seems as if they are consciously correcting stuff like that and making it much more pleasant to Star Trek fans, at least fans of TNG. And when the Borg show up in this episode, they actually feel dangerous, and so there's some suspense, some tension, some nice action scenes, unlike in season 1 when the Borg were just there just to be there and they were not even doing anything. They were not dangerous, they were not scary in any way. They were basically the victims. They were just pathetic in season 1 and they didn't even do anything. They were not really important to the story. It was just member bearers. They didn't really do anything with them, anything interesting. And when the Borg show up in this episode, they actually feel dangerous, even though they supposedly come in peace. They want an alliance with the Federation because I presume there's some bigger danger even to them, so that's also kind of mysterious, kind of interesting. So it was done much better this time. Now, having said all of this, I still have a long list of complaints I have about this episode, and I think at the top of the list is what they're doing with Picard's backstory, and that's something I predicted when I saw the first teaser of this season. I immediately noticed it and I immediately disliked it, and that's the whole idea that Picard only went to space because he wanted to escape some personal tragedy, some trauma he had as a kid back on Earth. And that's really annoying because that's really, again, disrespecting, deconstructing and changing the character of Picard. Because when he was talking about space exploration in TNG, it was obvious he went to space because of his curiosity, because his scientific mind, his philosophical interest in it, in all those good intellectual reasons for why he wants to go out and explore space and to meet aliens and to have diplomacy with them and all of that. So they were all very enlightened intellectual reasons. But now suddenly they're trying to tell us that one of the real reasons he did all of that was because he wanted to escape his tragedy as a kid. And so that's kind of annoying, that's kind of insulting. It reminds me of that line in season 1 when he said that he never got science fiction, that he tried to read some science fiction book and never got it. That was really annoying for someone who has lived through similar stories in reality, and obviously he did get it as the character that we saw in TNG, but I guess maybe that could work as a joke that for him it's not science fiction, it's science reality, so maybe that's what they meant with that line. But the way he said it in kind of an insulting way, kind of, oh, I don't get those kind of stories, so it felt so wrong to me. His whole character seemed so off, so different to how he was in TNG, when he used to be clever, intellectual, heroic in so many ways, and suddenly he's just kind of a shadow, kind of a distorted shadow of himself. And there are still elements of it in this episode, unfortunately, because they suddenly reveal that his father was beating up his mother when he was a little kid and he couldn't stop it, and his mother used to tell him to look at the stars and imagine that he's far off into space when it happens, so that he wouldn't have to hear all the violence and all of that. And I've heard some of the interviews of Patrick Stewart when he was telling those kinds of stories about his own life, that his real father used to beat his mother and stuff like that, and all of that is fine. Him promoting being against violence toward women, and all of that is fine. I don't have any problem with that at all. My problem with him is that he injects his own life stories into the character of Picard, and it doesn't really seem to fit that much. I wouldn't have any problem with it if it fits well with the established continuity, but I don't think it is. And I've looked back at some of the scenes that we saw in TNG of him talking about his father, and I don't really see any kind of clues to anything like that. So trying to inject this tragic backstory into this character, I'm not sure is a good idea. And that's the same kind of thing he did before, even in the movies, when Patrick Stewart injected his own hobbies, his own interest into the character of Picard. And that's a problem, I think, because the actor is not the same as the character. I don't think it's a good idea to let the actor write his own character. And whenever they gave Patrick the power to do it, it wasn't for the better. And you know, when he wanted to go jeep riding in the desert because that's what he likes to do, and they put it in the movie in a scene that doesn't connect to anything else in the movie, it was just there just because he wanted it to be there, and it kind of sucks because it doesn't really fit that universe. And in the previous season he wanted to inject his own political views into the universe of Star Trek, and again it feels kind of silly, it doesn't really fit. And now he wants to put his own childhood memories into the character of Picard, and I think it might also not fit so well. And so if they do something clever with it, if they somehow connect it to the story and to the character in a good way, I wouldn't oppose it. I would say fine, that maybe that's kind of interesting, maybe it has some kind of good moral message in the end of it, some kind of lesson. If it's done well, I will be okay with it, but I fear that it's once again an example of giving the actor too much power, and he just writes his own character now, and the character becomes him instead of being the character that we all know and want to see. So that's probably the thing that annoyed me most in this episode, when they tried to shoehorn in this tragic backstory into the character of Picard. And it reminds me of what they're constantly doing in Star Trek Discovery, when every single character has some kind of tragedy in their past, and it becomes ridiculous after a while when every single one has that kind of story. And the whole idea that Picard was running away into space because he couldn't face his fears and his difficulties, that really kind of ruins the character. And it's again that kind of pessimistic attitude. Instead of being optimistic, instead of saying he just wants to explore new planets, all of that, no, he was just running away because he's actually a coward who couldn't face his abusive father, so he just ran away into space. And we don't even know what happened with his mother. Was his mother killed by his father or what? So in the end of the episode, they kind of imply the Borg Queen is his mother, or maybe it's all in his head. I don't know. They no longer have the excuse of him having Iromodic syndrome, which is what I often joked about whenever he did or said something stupid in season 1. I always said that that's the Iromodic syndrome causing it. But now he doesn't have it anymore because it was cured ever since he was downloaded into the body of a robot. He doesn't have that condition anymore, or maybe it stayed in the programming, I guess. So maybe he still has it in a virtual sense. Maybe he's still kind of insane. So he hears the voice of his mother coming from the Borg Queen for some reason, so we don't actually know what happened with his mother. I actually liked how they picked an actress who does look very similar to the old lady we saw in a vision he had in season 1 of TNG when he saw his mother. So the actress who played her here is very similar to the one who played the old version of her in TNG, so I give them points for that. And somewhere in the episode he meets Guinan, who is now the owner of a bar in 10 Forward Street on Earth, and that's kind of funny. Like, why would she do that? Like, just as a joke for the audience, like, it doesn't really make any sense. And she also tells Picard that there's something about his past that he never told her, even though they're so close and all of that, and he still doesn't tell her even in this scene. So the whole scene was kind of pointless because it was basically a cameo without any real necessity to it. It wasn't really necessary for the story, unless I guess maybe later on when they will be in the new timeline, maybe he will come visit her again to get her insights, because she is supposedly able to see alternate timelines. So I guess we'll wait and see. And they gave a lame excuse for why she looks much older now, and I made the theory videos about all of this before, wondering how they will do it, and the way they did it is simply by having her say that her species are able to grow old if they want to. So suddenly she decided to grow old so that the humans around her will feel more comfortable. She makes herself grow older. And it seems kind of strange because for centuries that she lived with humans, it wasn't a problem. Suddenly it's a problem. So it doesn't really make any sense. I realize they had to give some kind of excuse because making her look young with CGI would be too expensive for a long periods of time. So they had to give some kind of excuse, so they did acknowledge the fact that she's not supposed to age, and then tried to explain it by saying that she can age if she wants to. But what does that say about her character? Like, she's basically committing slow suicide. She basically decided to grow old. Like, who would want to be old? Doesn't it mean she's less in shape? She's less healthy as well? Like, it doesn't really make any sense. But I guess there was no real way to explain it in a way that will fit continuity, because, we saw Soren, who is from the same species, and he did look old, but he looked the same for 80 years when we saw him in 2 time periods in Generations, and so any excuse, any explanation wouldn't really make any sense, so I guess they did the best they could. Maybe it would have been better to simply ignore this issue, maybe just say she got fatter and that's why she looks older, but is not really older. So I'm not sure how I would have written it better, but it still seems kind of silly. And in the end of the episode, when we saw Q, they actually did exactly what I wanted them to do. Is simply show him look young with special effects, and then simply click his finger and make himself look older. And for Q, that's perfectly okay, because we know that he can look whatever he wants to. He's not actually organic, he's actually some kind of energy entity, and he can look like whatever he wants to look like. But Guinan is actually a flesh and blood creature. She's actually a humanoid alien. She's not a shapeshifter, so saying that she can change her appearance does seem kind of fishy, even though maybe it does fit some of the dialogue between Q and her back in Q Who, when he said this woman is not what she appears to be, she's an imp and all of that. So if they want to add these extra abilities for the El-Orients, I guess it's okay, even though again it's a problem with Soren in Generations, because he didn't seem to have those abilities in that movie, so that's a little bit strange. So maybe they could have come up with better excuses for this whole issue, but the scene itself wasn't really that bad, except that part when again she starts questioning him about why he really went to the stars and why is he alone, how come he never had a long-term relationship. And the only problem I really have with that whole issue in this episode is that once again they seem to forget the episode The Inner Light, in which he actually spent a whole lifetime living on a planet and he had a wife and a family, so he does know what it's like to be married and all of that, and yet this show seems to be ignoring that completely. Some could argue that maybe that whole event was not really real for him, because it was kind of a simulation, that maybe he was implanted the memories of some other person, so it wasn't really his life that he lived, so it doesn't count. I guess it can be argued, but still it's kind of fishy how they never acknowledged that. Like, even in the previous season, Kurtzman said Picard was never a father before, he doesn't know what it's like to be a father, and that made me facepalm, because obviously he never saw the episode The Inner Light if he said such a thing, because Picard obviously would know what it's like to be a father, since he had kids and grandkids in that episode, and he was married for 50 years in that lifetime that he had, and yet now apparently it's never acknowledged, as if he doesn't remember it at all. So that's a little bit annoying, that's a little bit of a continuity mistake, even though it wasn't actually his life that he lived, but still it would have been nice if he acknowledged it somehow, maybe because he was married for a long time, maybe because he knows what it's like to lose his wife and his whole family, which he discovered were not real, so maybe it was tragic for him. That's something they could have used to explain it better. And the same with how his family burned to death in a fire, like his brother and his nephew died when the nephew was still young, and Picard has some kind of tragedy for it. It was mentioned in Generations and never addressed since. And it's strange how in this whole show, in which they constantly want to give him this tragic backstory and have him be depressed and all of that, and yet they never use the established stories we have already, like his family dying in a fire. How come they never brought it up? They never mentioned it, as if it never happened. And even when it would have fit perfectly with what they're trying to do, is having some kind of character story with him, and yet they ignore all the things from established continuity and instead insert these new things, like his mother being abused when he was a kid by his father. And we did have some lines in TNG when he said that his own father and him were estranged and all of that, and there was also a line in the episode Family when they were talking about the replicator, because his brother is against the replicators, and Picard said he doesn't understand why you cannot add convenience. He said that he remembers similar arguments between father and mother. So now it seems like a funny line, because he kind of casually mentions how his mom and dad used to argue, but now it's like this violent abuse and beating up the wife and all of that, all because she wanted to have a replicator, and I guess her husband wanted her to cook and be in the kitchen all day long, and she wanted a replicator, so he beat her up. And then she told the young Jean-Luc that whenever he hears all the violence, he will simply stand in that place with the windows and look up at the stars and gaze at the stars. And it's also funny how he used to be a stargazer. He used to stand around and gaze gaze at the stars, and then he got a ship called the Stargazer. And also in this episode we see a new version of the Stargazer, which looks very similar to the old one, only much more modernized, obviously, but still the same general shape, with 4 nacelles and all of that. I guess it's kind of cool, but it's also kind of convenient that Rios just happens to get that ship, which is the same name as Picard's old ship, which also connects with him gazing at the stars as a kid because of the sudden abuse story they injected into all of this. And about Rios, he's now a Starfleet captain again. I guess that's all fine. That's part of the whole optimistic approach. I don't have a problem with that. But he's still smoking non-stop on the bridge. He still has a cigar in every single scene. If it was just one scene, I could have forgiven that. That's part of his character. I guess that will be fine. But it's in every single time that he's on screen. He always has the cigar, and he doesn't even light it. He just likes to hold it, I guess. He just wants to look cool. And you know, I don't mind that. I liked that in the first season, but there he wasn't actually a Starfleet captain. He was all alone on the ship, and he was kind of a broken guy and whatever, kind of like Wolverine. I'm fine with that, but now he's a Starfleet captain, sitting on the bridge, commanding officers with a cigar in his mouth in every single scene. That seems very un-Star Trek-ish. What kind of message does it send to kids? And you know, from a science fiction point of view, I don't actually mind that, because I presume in that far future they would be able to cure any issue that is caused by smoking or drinking, so it wouldn't really be a risky thing to do. You could do it all day long and wouldn't suffer any consequences of that. You can also show someone binge eating whole mountains of food, and that would be okay, because you could presume in the future they can easily avoid the side effects of that. They can easily, you know, beam out the contents of what you just ate, or simply have some kind of medical technology to prevent you from getting fat and unhealthy, so you can actually binge all day long and eat a bunch of food. But would it be a good idea to show it on screen, to show everybody doing it all the time? What kind of message would it send? What kind of role model would they be if they behave like that on the screen? One of the things I loved in the old Star Trek shows is how they were a positive educational role model. I grew up watching TNG, and I do think it was good for me in the sense of becoming a better person, knowing what it's like, what you should be like. But today's shows are doing the opposite. Suddenly drugs are cool, smoking is cool, drinking all the time is cool, and we also see a bunch of people drinking in this episode. We see Dr. Jurati getting drunk at the bar and then joking about killing her former boyfriend and getting away with it. I guess it's a good thing they acknowledged it. They said that she got cleared from those charges because she was under the influence of some alien mind meld and all of that, and that's fine. But then she makes jokes out of it. She says, I'm not good dating material. I just killed my boyfriend and got away scot-free from it. And she doesn't seem remorseful at all, so I didn't like that part, and the whole thing of why is she even getting so drunk. And then we have Soji being like a diplomat, trying to convince the people of the galaxy that the androids are good and all of that. And I keep thinking about the fact that she almost wiped out all life in the galaxy because she was heartbroken from that Romulan or something, and then she almost wiped out all life in the galaxy by bringing those tentacles into the galaxy. And then only in the last second she got convinced by Picard not to do it. So she didn't do it because of the kindness of her heart. She was actually fully intent of unleashing those monsters into the galaxy, knowing that they will wipe out all organic life to save all the androids and whatever. So she was almost genocidal villain of the show. And only in the last second she decided not to. And speaking of robot tentacles, that is something that the new Star Trek shows seem to fetish about all the time, because we constantly see that kind of stuff. The episode begins with someone beaming into the Starfleet bridge and using robotic tentacles to attack everyone. So that's kind of funny as well. It turns out to be the Borg Queen, of course. And maybe that should have been those tentacles from the previous season, because didn't those tentacles, they said, they're very powerful beings from outside the galaxy, so how come they cannot get into the galaxy themselves? Only if you open a portal for them, only then they can get in. So if Soji did that in the previous season, wouldn't they know that someone did it? Wouldn't they be trying to get into this galaxy by themselves? So why not make them the villains? Maybe they will be revealed to be the bigger villains that the Borg are scared about, but I kind of doubt it. I'm sure the show simply forgot all about those tentacles. We'll never get to know what they are. So it's now the Borg who wants to make peace with the Federation because they're scared of something, maybe because of the changes of the timeline that they see coming, and they open a rift near Earth, and they send a Borg ship which looks kind of funny, and it kind of opens up like a certain area of the female body, which I will not mention as not to get strikes on YouTube. And the Borg keep calling for Picard. That's also something funny because in the previous season, all the Borg kept referring to Picard as Locutus. Even random Borg that see him in the corridor, they all called him that, and that was kind of unintentional comedy. So maybe that's why maybe they heard some of the criticism and they don't want to do it again. So suddenly the Borg just call him Picard and not Locutus. Then Picard calls for the ship to self-destruct, and I guess because he's an admiral, he can do it all by himself. He can blow up the ship without the approval of the captain even, apparently, and he still has that Irish Romulan woman working for him, and her husband, who we saw in the previous season, apparently died off screen, so she's now single, and now she's kind of eyeing Picard and wants to be with Picard. And this whole situation is also a bit of an unintentional comedy because I keep remembering how much she hated her husband in the previous season. She kept calling him an idiot and hitting him and stuff like that. And suddenly he mysteriously vanished. And so I keep thinking, she is a Romulan after all, so maybe she poisoned him or arranged an accident or something like that because she secretly has the hots for Picard, and now that she knows that he's an android, maybe she knows that he's fully functional now, maybe he has 3 speeds and all of that, so she's curious to check it out, so she got rid of her husband whom she hated, and now she tries to hit on Picard, but Picard hesitates and doesn't want to do it, and so that brings up that whole storyline about him never being in a long-term relationship, totally forgetting about the inner light and all of that. But at least it kind of explores his character. It does kind of raise the question that I myself asked, how come he never has kids, how come he was never married in real life and all of that. So I don't really mind them exploring that. And then he goes to the academy and makes a speech there because apparently he's the head of the academy, which is exactly what I suggested previously. And Elnor is now a cadet in the academy, which is also kind of fishy because I keep wondering, wait, how he will be able to be an officer and still keep his ideology of absolute candor and all of that, because does that mean, he can never lie? So how can he be in Starfleet? What if he's encounters some kind of situation like being sent on a covert mission as a spy against an enemy force, or in a first contact situation when he has to pretend to be an alien? If he'll be in such a situation as part of his duties in Starfleet, how will he be able to reconcile it with his absolute candor stuff? And so that seems kind of fishy, but I guess we'll wait and see where it goes, maybe in the next season, because most of this season will be in an alternate timeline anyway, so none of this will really matter, because by the end of the episode, after the ship blew up, suddenly Picard is back in his house, but it's now all in a different timeline, in which I guess the Federation is an empire now, and we see a giant force field covering all of Earth, and suddenly Q appears, and he first looks young, then he clicks his finger to make himself look older, so that's a neat excuse, so that's exactly what I suggested, and it works much better than the whole Guinan thing, which doesn't make sense. And that's basically the end of the episode, so this will all be in a different timeline, which became corrupted somehow, and now they'll have to go back in time to correct it. And the opening of the show also seems to imply time travel, and they show a sand clock and all that kind of stuff. And also some of the member bearers they showed in the episode were just there just to be there and not really a part of the story. For example, in the first part of the episode, we saw that Bajoran artifact, that piece of stone that Cisco broke in one episode, which released a Wraith and a Prophet, which had to fight each other and all of that. So when we first saw that item in the teasers, a lot of fans were speculating, what does that mean? How will it tie to the time travel story? Because, the Bajoran gods, prophets and Wraiths, they're all non-linear, they will be fighting each other in the past and so on. So that artifact must be connected to all of this somehow, and now apparently it was just there just to be there and does not actually connect to anything. So that's how a lot of this stuff feels like it's just here just to be cool, just to please the fans, but it's not really a lot of thought behind it, and that's a problem in my opinion, and that's what worries me. So I think it can go either way at this point. We have a few shots from the next episode, and we see Brent Spiner back as Adam Sung, who in the new timeline is apparently a much honored figure. We see a hologram of him in San Francisco, close to Starfleet headquarters, and this is all in the bad reality. So anyway, it is indeed the Sung, apparently maybe the first Sung, and the name Adam also implies maybe some cloning took place or something. I hope that will be the explanation, otherwise it will be ridiculous if all the men in the Sung family look the same for centuries without explanation. That will be extremely stupid, so I hope they will explain that he was actually cloning himself each generation, and that's why every song looks the same. Any other explanation will be ridiculous in my opinion. So I am kind of curious to see where they're going with all of this and how the story will unfold. So I will give this season a chance. I am hoping it will actually be good. Maybe they will surprise me and make it good this time. So I hope it will be, but I'm still kind of pessimistic because these are some of the same writers that wrote season 1, and so I'm extremely worried and pessimistic that they will screw everything up again and nothing will make sense in the end. So I guess we'll wait and see. So that's all I had to say about all of this for now. Let me know what you think and we can discuss all of this in the comments below. And I will see you all next time. Bye bye.